everyone, today's going to be a different kind of episode. Kind of been focusing on just watching us fish. Talked to a couple of people and they want to know a little bit more about what we kind of do to get ready, like the logisticals and how to fill your fly box, so to speak. And I was lucky enough to have a couple of family members that were pretty big in the the outdoors, and I had family members that showed me how to tie jigs, and then I got a little older, how to tie flies, and ever since about '94, that's the only kind of flies I've fished with is stuff that I make, and it just makes things that much sweeter when you fool the fish with something that you made. I've just got the basics laid out for what I'm going to be tying up today. We're going to have some hackle, some elk hair, or you could use deer hair for the tail. Over here I've got some synthetic dubbing, bobbin with a fine thread, finishing tool, something to snip with, a little something to help hold on to that hackle feather when I get to turn it around, some head cement. And I also keep a little bit of wire handy, because after I put on the head cement I like to ram that through the eye so I don't have to worry about that on the water. The finishing product, if you can see it, that is a size 24 trico spinner mayfly. All it is a little bit of this black and white hackle, some of this dubbing over here, and a little bit of hair coming out for the tail. And it was definitely producing last time I was out. Alright, what I showed you earlier on that dime that I'd kind of colored in with a little bit of marker for size reference, that was a size 24. So it's a little easier to see. I'm tying on a size 18 today, which is still a useful size for that kind of pattern for all the places I've been going lately. And hopefully it'll come through a little bit clearer on the camera. And just to double check, yeah, I think we'll be alright. First thing I'm going to do is start out with a little base thread layer. Just going to lay it on top. Well, would you look at that. You want to make sure that your vise is well set, well adjusted, so you don't have anything embarrassing like that. This is a little older low-end model vise and not exactly the right tip, but I'm having trouble changing them out. So we'll give this another go. Just give it a couple of wraps, sit down a good base. Got this little bit of excess, give that a snip. What I was talking about, it's not exactly the right tip for this size of hook, is typically I like to be able to see where the barb is on the hook. That way I can use that as a reference of how far back I'm going to wrap. But I'm just going to assume it's a little bit further, and that's where the back of the shank starts to curve down. Now we're going to be working from the rear of the fly towards the eye. Next thing we're going to do, grab just 2 strands of elk hair. Like I said, you can use deer, you can use probably moose, any kind of heavily haired creature. I'm a big fan of naturals. They have all different kinds of synthetics out there that you can just get a couple of strands of and call it good, but nature did a better job and had more time design than we did. Now I'm going to take it, I'm going to split it, and I'm going to lay them just on either side of the shank of the hook. And something that's important to remember is take your time. Practice makes perfect, and you'll get it eventually. So I'm going to do one wrap just to see how everything is laying, and I'm going to pull very gently on this one, try to get them both the same length. And then I'm going to give it a couple more wraps, see if anything needs to get adjusted, and trim off this front. I kind of like how that's going, so we're just going to go ahead and cinch that down a little bit. Wrap down anything that's sticking out in the front. Now we got our tail. Now typically for a tail, I don't like using anything longer than the gap between the tip of the hook and the back of the hook. At most, about twice that. It's just a good proportional reference for how long your shank is and how long your tail needs to go back behind it. But with the flies that were flying around, relative to the body size, the tails were just sweeping back. And of course, they were also considerably smaller than what I'm comfortable tying and showing people. So I'm going to reach into my dubbing. I'm just going to pull out just a little bit of fuzz. You don't need a whole lot. And I've got the thread pulled out, and I'm going to run it up along the thread, and I'm going to just spin it on with my fingers. Just spin it on, kind of like the world's smallest violin. You can slide it up and down the thread that you've got, kind of put it in better position to wrap along your hook. Alright, and then you just wrap it on. Small layers are going to build up. I've got enough on here that I can go to the front, I can back it off, go to the back, go back up to the front again. Looks like I was not exactly as generous as I should have been, but easy fix. You just grab another little pinch, spin it on, and you go back to it. Now I like to bring the thread forward to the eye where it's bent back around, and just put a couple loops just to make sure that that's closed up. Now for the hackle. We're going to look along here, and obviously the larger feathers are towards the rear, smaller ones are up towards the neck. It's a fairly small fly, so we're going to dig something out towards the front, one of these more narrow, shorter feathers. Grab low, give it a nice little tug. Get a little something like that. Work your fingers along it a little bit and see how long it's going to be. I think it's going to work out pretty good. Just give that a little snip. And now with this little bit of feather there, I'm going to pull some of those fibers so I've got a little bare spot. That's a little longer than I'd prefer. Now with that little bare spot, I'm going to run that parallel to the hook shank. I'm going to give it a couple of wraps. You want to have that fairly tight. We're about to put a little bit of pressure on this and spin it around the hook. With this being a small little bit of feather, it's easier to have this little clamp tool, and you just let it drop. Take a look and see if that's going to hold up, and double check the length of the fibers, and I think that's going to work out just fine. And you're just going to spin it around. Typically 2 to 3, 3 to 4 wraps is going to be good. That's going to give you enough hackle to where everything's going to stay afloat. Now you can just really carefully, without pulling your hook out of the vise, run a couple of lashings over that so you can pull off to the side and give a snip. Being careful not to trim off any more of that than you need to. Now they have a couple different little devices to help save your hackle for when you're wrapping things up. I just grab it by the fingers and give it a couple more wraps back. Now to finish this off, I've got a little whipping tool, and it makes life a lot easier. Just run it through, I give it a couple of twists, and that loop that's made, if I can get it over the eye, is going to make a nice little knot. And I'm going to give it one, maybe two more. Now that's whipped down. Give that thread a little snip. Come over here with your head cement. Just give it a little bit of a dip. Give a dip on the fly head. And if I had this better situated, I could give this a spin. I could hit the bottom with it upside down, but a little limited on space. So now I'm going to just touch on that a little bit, get any excess off. And that wire that I wasn't going to use for the fly, I am going to run through the eye so I don't have to try to punch it out while I'm out on the river. And there you go, there's a completed fly. You know, depending on where you go, that can run a buck, $1.50. Quality is going to vary, who it's going to be coming from, and what the company and where it's made. But like I said, there's just something good about catching a fish on something you made yourself. When you're starting out, they're really not going to look that pretty, but you'd be surprised just how effective some of the things that you can make starting out can work. And with practice, everything's going to come a lot easier, and you're going to be able to start operating on smaller and smaller size hooks. And something that people kind of think about is, well, how much does it cost to tie your own flies? And the startup cost can be fairly expensive depending on what kind of materials you get, what brands you go through. And there is some limited options and different things. Like there's not a very large market for fly tying vices, so you only have a limited manufacturer. But you really don't need a whole lot. A lot of the materials will transfer very well from one fly to another. And, you know, organization, it's all on the person. Like for instance, I'll show you how I got things set up. I've got a Tupperware box full of odds, ends, hairs, feathers, a Ziploc bag full of hooks, my old vise, it's worn out and seen better days, and yeah, not a very elaborate setup, but it's what I need to fill my fly box. And you know, with time, if you got a lot of resources out there, you've got the internet, you've got videos much better than this. I can show you greater detail where to go. But back to the cost, something else you got to consider is if you're just going to your local fly shop, which I definitely support when I can, is you know, you're looking at spending, you know, $1 to $1.50 for some of the flies. And if you have a good day on the water, you know, you can have flies get wore out by the fish. You just kept catching them, and got those little needle teeth, kind of like little puppy teeth, and it'll just tear it up, especially using just nothing but, you know, feathers and little fibers wrapped around a tiny wire. Like, they're gonna get wore out, and they're gonna need to be replaced. And if you have a bad day on the river, you're gonna be losing them in trees, sticks, rocks, everything else. So when you start transitioning into making your own and start using store-boughts for patterns, then when you lose one of your own flies, you can think, hey, it's fine, I'll just go home and make 3 more. Or, hey, this didn't work that well, I'm not going to make as many, versus this didn't work, I wish I hadn't bought 10. So, something to consider, and I would definitely recommend people get into something like this, because it really does cut down the cost in the long run, and you get a greater satisfaction on catching something that you made yourself. Hope you enjoyed.